The entire checkout line froze. Naomi turned slowly toward the deep voice behind her, snow melting from the edges of her braids onto the shoulders of her faded jacket. William Everett stepped forward beneath the harsh white lights of the supermarket, one gloved hand resting casually on the handle of his shopping basket. The cashier blinked twice before recognition finally hit her face. Her posture straightened instantly. "Mr. Everett," she stammered. Nearby employees suddenly stopped pretending not to watch. Naomi looked between them, confused. She did not recognize the man standing beside the candy display. To her, he looked like every other rich businessman downtown. Expensive coat, perfect shoes, tired eyes. William glanced at the loaf of bread, still sitting abandoned beside the register. Then his gaze settled on the little girl clutching coins in her freezing hands. "Ring up the bread," he said calmly. "And whatever else she came here for." The cashier hurried to grab the loaf. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." Naomi immediately shook her head. "No, thank you." The words came so fast they startled everyone nearby. William paused. "No." Naomi stepped back slightly. "I did not ask for charity." A murmur moved through the line behind them. Someone lowered their phone after secretly recording the scene. William studied her face carefully. She looked exhausted, cold, and embarrassed, but underneath all of that was something far stronger. Bride, the kind he had not seen in years. "Your brother is hungry," he said gently. "This is not charity. It is help." Naomi swallowed. "Help costs people things." William almost answered immediately, but the sentence stopped him. Around them, the storm outside thickened. Wind rattled the glass doors hard enough to make them shiver in their frames. Somewhere overhead, Christmas music played softly through old ceiling speakers, completely disconnected from the silence now filling the checkout lanes. Naomi carefully placed her dollar and coins back into her coat pocket. "I can earn it," she said quietly. "My grandma always said you should work for what you take." William noticed the tiny crack in her voice when she mentioned her. "Grandmother. What is your name?" he asked. "Naomi Carter." "How old are you, Naomi?" 8. The cashier scanned the bread nervously. Beep. The sound echoed strangely loud. William looked at the screen. $4.27. Less than the cost of one of the silk ties hanging in his closet. Yet somehow the amount felt heavier than every business contract he had signed that year. "Do you need anything else besides bread?" he asked. Naomi hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the refrigerated section across the store where gallons of milk sat glowing beneath bright white lights. Then quickly she looked away again, almost ashamed to have looked at all. William followed her gaze. "Milk too," he told the cashier. Naomi immediately shook her head harder this time. "No, sir. Bread is enough. Children need more than bread." "Then I will come back tomorrow," she whispered. William stared at her for a long second. The little girl was trembling from the cold, but she still spoke as if she were negotiating terms in a courtroom instead of standing hungry inside a grocery store during a snowstorm. A customer near the magazine rack quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Another man lowered his head, suddenly interested in the floor. William slowly removed his leather gloves. "Naomi," he said softly, "what if I told you somebody once helped me when I was your age?" She frowned slightly. "Were you poor?" The question hit harder than she intended. William gave the smallest nod. "A long time ago." Naomi looked surprised. Billionaires were not supposed to have stories like that. They were supposed to appear fully built like skyscrapers. Not children. Never children. The cashier finished bagging the bread. William added milk, soup, eggs, peanut butter, and cereal onto the counter one by one. Naomi watched each item with widening eyes. "Sir," she said nervously, "that is too much." William glanced at her. "You said your brother likes toast before bed." Naomi nodded slowly. "Then maybe tonight he deserves breakfast too." For the first time since entering the store, Naomi looked at William Everett without fear, embarrassment, or caution, just quiet disbelief. And somewhere, deep inside his chest, a feeling he thought money had buried years ago began to wake up. Naomi stared at the grocery bags piling slowly across the counter as if they belonged to someone else entirely. The gallon of milk looked especially impossible, bright white beneath the fluorescent lights, cold mist clinging to the plastic jug. She had spent nearly 20 minutes walking through the store deciding whether bread or milk mattered more tonight. Now both sat in front of her, along with eggs, cereal, peanut butter, soup, and a small bag of clementines William had quietly added when she was not looking. The cashier scanned the final item with trembling hands. "That will be $86.14, sir." William slid his black card across the counter without checking the total. Naomi's eyes widened slightly. $86 felt larger than the storm outside, larger than the city itself. She looked down at her sneakers, embarrassed all over again. "Sir," she whispered carefully, "you really do not have to do all this." William signed the receipt with one smooth motion. "I know." Naomi frowned softly. That answer somehow unsettled her more than anything else. Most adults help children because they wanted praise, attention, or gratitude. But William Everett looked almost uncomfortable being thanked at all. Behind them, a young man near the frozen food aisle continued filming with his phone held low against his chest. Another customer whispered, "That is Everett, the billionaire from television." A woman beside him shook her head slowly. "And that little girl came in here with $1. The sentence spread through the store in fragments. $1. $1 left. Only $1. Naomi heard it and wished the floor would swallow her whole. She pulled her sleeves over her hands and stared toward the automatic doors where snow whipped across the parking lot in angry white waves. "You do not need to feel ashamed," William said quietly, almost as if he had read her thoughts. Naomi shook her head quickly. "I am not ashamed of being poor." The answer came instantly. Honest. Certain. William looked at her more carefully then. "What are you ashamed of?" Naomi hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the straps of her faded backpack. "People looking at me like I am a problem." The words landed heavily between them. Even the cashier stopped moving for a second. William glanced around the store. People immediately looked away when his eyes met theirs. Some suddenly pretended to study candy bars or magazines. Others lowered their phones. Naomi reached carefully for one grocery bag, but William stopped her gently. "Those are too heavy for you. I carry heavier things sometimes." William did not ask what she meant. Somehow he already knew the answer would hurt to hear. The store manager suddenly appeared from the back office, red-faced and nervous. "Mr. Everett, sir, I just want to apologize if there was any misunderstanding tonight. Our employees are trained to follow policy and—" William turned slowly toward him. The manager's voice faded. "A child asked for bread," William said calmly. "Your staff treated her like a security threat. Sir, we did not realize that she mattered." Silence, cold and sharp. Naomi looked down immediately, uncomfortable hearing adults argue because of her. The manager forced a weak smile toward Naomi. "We were only trying to avoid theft issues." Naomi's cheeks burned. "I was not stealing," she whispered. William's jaw tightened slightly. "I know." The manager opened his mouth again, then closed it when William lifted one hand. The billionaire's voice never rose, but somehow the entire front end of the supermarket felt smaller around him. "Get someone to carry these groceries to her home." "Of course, sir." Naomi immediately shook her head. "No," William blinked. "No. You already helped enough. It is snowing outside. I walk every day." William studied her tiny frame beneath the oversized jacket. Snow rattled harder against the windows now, the wind screaming around the corners of the building. Somewhere in the distance thunder rolled low through the dark Chicago sky. Naomi adjusted her backpack straps and reached for the grocery bags again. "Please," she said softly. "My mom does not like strangers coming home." William froze slightly at the word mom. Something about the way Naomi said it sounded less like comfort and more like responsibility. He slowly picked up 2 grocery bags himself. "Then I will walk you home." Naomi looked ready to refuse again, but another gust of icy wind shook the glass doors hard enough to make her flinch. William noticed. You should not be outside alone tonight, he said quietly. Naomi stared at him for a long moment. Then finally, very slowly, she nodded. The automatic doors slid open with a burst of icy wind that swept snowflakes across the supermarket floor. Naomi hugged her backpack tightly against her chest while William Everett carried the grocery bags beside her. Outside, downtown Chicago glowed beneath wet streetlights and streaks of freezing rain. Car tires hissed along slushy roads. Christmas decorations hanging above the avenue swayed in the storm like tired stars. Naomi pulled her hood over her braids and immediately stepped into the cold as if she had done it 1,000 times before. William followed beside her in silence. The snow crunched beneath his polished shoes while Naomi's worn sneakers soaked through almost instantly. He noticed she walked carefully around icy patches without even looking down anymore. "Abbott, how far is your apartment?" he asked after a minute. "About 6 blocks. In this weather?" Naomi shrugged lightly. "The buses stop early when the roads get bad." William glanced at her small hands tucked beneath her sleeves. They were trembling again. Without speaking, he shifted the grocery bags into one hand and removed his scarf with the other. Naomi immediately shook her head. "No, sir. You need that." William gently draped the thick gray scarf around her shoulders anyway. "I will survive 6 blocks." Naomi touched the soft fabric carefully, almost afraid to wrinkle it. "Nobody gives people things like this where I live." The sentence lingered in the freezing air between them. William looked ahead toward the blurred city lights. Maybe they should. Naomi studied him quietly while they crossed the next intersection. Snow swirled around passing headlights, turning the whole street silver and gold beneath the storm. For the first time in years, William Everett was walking through downtown without security, assistance, or drivers surrounding him. Just a little girl carrying one plastic grocery bag with both hands like it contained something sacred. A group of teenagers hurried past beneath umbrellas. One recognized William immediately and slowed down in shock. "Yo, that is Everett," he whispered loudly to his friends. Another glanced at Naomi and frowned in confusion. William kept walking. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the sidewalk. "I am sorry people keep staring. You did not do anything wrong." "I know." Her answer came quickly. Honest again. William looked at her with quiet surprise. Most adults spent their lives confusing shame with guilt. Naomi somehow understood the difference already. They passed a closed diner glowing softly behind fogged windows. The smell of coffee and grilled onions drifted through the cold air. Naomi slowed slightly near the warmth pouring from inside before forcing herself to keep moving. William noticed. "Are you hungry too?" Naomi shook her head automatically. Then her stomach betrayed her with a small growl loud enough for both of them to hear. Her cheeks turned red beneath the streetlights. William almost smiled for the first time all evening. "That sounds like a yes." Naomi looked horrified. "It is just because I skipped lunch." "Why?" "My little brother was still hungry after breakfast." William stopped walking for half a second. Snow collected silently on the shoulders of his black coat. "How old is your brother?" "4. And your mother?" Naomi hesitated this time. The city noise around them suddenly felt farther away. "She gets tired a lot now." William understood enough not to press harder yet. They turned down a narrower street lined with aging brick apartment buildings and flickering laundromat signs. The sidewalks here were rougher, darker. A grocery cart rattled loose in the wind near an alley entrance. Naomi walked faster suddenly, eager to reach home before the storm worsened. William noticed the instinctive tension in her shoulders. "Do you always carry everything alone?" he asked quietly. Naomi adjusted the heavy bag against her hip. "Most days. That is too much. Responsibility for an 8-year-old. She glanced up at him beneath the falling snow. "Nobody asked if I was ready." The words hit William harder than any boardroom argument ever had. They reached the front of an old brown brick building with rusted railings and one flickering porch light struggling against the storm. Naomi climbed the steps carefully, then paused near the entrance door. Warm yellow light leaked faintly from the hallway windows above. She looked back at William Everett standing in the snow holding groceries for strangers he had met less than an hour ago. "You really walked all the way here," she said softly, almost to herself. William looked at the tired building, the broken mailbox near the stairs, the freezing wind slipping through cracked windows. Then he looked back at Naomi. "You walked farther for your family." Naomi pushed open the heavy apartment door with her shoulder, and a wave of warm air smelling faintly of radiator heat and canned soup drifted into the stormy night. The hallway lights buzzed overhead with a tired yellow glow, flickering every few seconds like they were fighting to stay alive. William followed her inside carrying the grocery bags while melted snow dripped from the edges of his coat onto cracked linoleum floors. Somewhere upstairs a baby cried softly. Pipes rattled inside the walls. Naomi quickly wiped her wet sneakers on the faded entry mat before starting up the narrow staircase 2 steps at a time. "Third floor," she said quietly over her shoulder. William climbed behind her, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in a building like this. His polished shoes echoed against the metal stair edges while Naomi moved through the stairwell like she belonged to every sound inside it. Halfway up, she paused to catch her breath but tried to hide it by adjusting the grocery bag against her hip. William noticed anyway. "You do this every day?" Naomi nodded. "Sometimes more than once if Mama needs medicine." They reached the 3rd floor landing where the hallway narrowed into peeling paint, old carpet, and dented apartment doors decorated with tiny Christmas wreaths from years past. Naomi stopped in front of apartment 3B and carefully unlocked 3 different locks with frozen fingers. Before opening the door, she turned toward William with sudden nervousness. "My mom gets embarrassed when people see the apartment." William answered softly, "I am not here to judge your home." Naomi studied his face for a moment, searching for something she had probably learned not to trust easily. Then slowly she opened the door. Warmth spilled out first. Then the smell of laundry soap, instant noodles, and peppermint tea. The apartment was tiny, small enough that William could see almost everything from the doorway.
À Worn couche-tucht besid à portabliter.
Crayon drawings taped carefully to the walls. A tiny artificial Christmas tree blinking unevenly in one corner with only half its lights working. Beneath the tree sat a little boy wearing dinosaur pajamas 2 sizes too small. He looked up instantly when Naomi entered. "Nay, nay!" he shouted happily before running across the room toward her. Naomi nearly dropped the groceries, laughing softly as the little boy wrapped both arms around her waist. "Slow down, Micah," she whispered. "You are going to slip." Micah froze when he noticed William standing in the doorway. His tiny face turned cautious immediately. "Who is that?" Naomi knelt beside him. "This is Mr. Everett. He helped us at the store." Micah stared at the grocery bags like they were treasure chests. "Did you get bread?" Naomi smiled tiredly. "And more." From the back room came a weak cough followed by the sound of blankets shifting. William looked toward the partially open bedroom door just as a soft voice drifted out. "Naomi?" Naomi immediately straightened. "I am home, Mama." A woman slowly appeared in the doorway wrapped in a faded gray cardigan. She could not have been older than 32, but exhaustion had carved years into her face. Her skin looked pale beneath the apartment light, and one hand stayed pressed lightly against the wall for balance. When she saw William standing there in his expensive coat holding groceries, confusion crossed her features first, then embarrassment. "Naomi," she said carefully. "Who is this?" Naomi rushed to explain. "Mama, the storm got bad and the store was closing and Mr. Everett walked us home because he did not want us outside alone." The woman's eyes moved to the overflowing grocery bags. Milk, eggs, bread, soup, things no parent wanted strangers noticing were missing. She lowered her gaze immediately. "Sir, you did not have to do all this." William set the bags gently on the kitchen counter. "Your daughter was trying to buy bread for your son with $1. Silence settled across the apartment. Naomi looked down at the floor. Micah clutched her hand tighter. The mother closed her eyes briefly like the sentence physically hurt to hear aloud. "I told her we would manage," she whispered. Naomi's voice came quickly. "We are managing." William looked at the little girl standing barefoot now on faded carpet, still trying to protect everyone around her from shame that should never have belonged to her in the first place. The tiny Christmas lights blinked softly in the corner, while snow hammered against the apartment windows outside. Then Micah looked up at William with wide, hopeful eyes and asked the question nobody else in the room was brave enough to ask. "Mister," he whispered, "is all that food really for us?" William looked down at Micah standing beside the tiny blinking Christmas tree, his dinosaur pajamas brushing against the floor as he waited for the answer like it might disappear if nobody spoke quickly enough. Outside, wind rattled the apartment windows hard enough to make the glass tremble. Inside, the room felt painfully still. William slowly nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "All of it." Micah's eyes widened with pure disbelief. Then he looked at Naomi as if waiting for permission to believe something good had finally happened. Naomi smiled faintly and rubbed his shoulder. "Go look in the bags." Micah hurried toward the kitchen counter so fast his socks slid across the worn linoleum floor. The moment he spotted the cereal box, he gasped loud enough to make Naomi laugh quietly for the first time all night. "Chocolate cereal," he whispered like he had just discovered treasure. Their mother lowered herself carefully onto the edge of the couch, one hand pressed against her chest as, though simply standing had exhausted her. William noticed how Naomi immediately moved closer to her without even thinking about it. Protective. Automatic. "My name is Elena," the woman said softly after a moment, "and I am sorry my daughter caused trouble at your store tonight." Naomi turned instantly. "Mama, I did not cause trouble." "I know, baby." Elena reached for her hand gently. "But people like Mr. Everett should not have to deal with our problems." William glanced around the apartment again. A tiny stack of overdue envelopes sat neatly beside the lamp. A space heater hummed near the couch. One of the apartment windows had been covered with clear tape where cold air leaked through a crack in the glass. Nothing about the room suggested laziness or failure. Only exhaustion. The kind that builds slowly over months when people run out of choices before they run out of strength. "Your daughter did nothing wrong," William said quietly. Elena looked unconvinced. "Naomi tries to help too much." Naomi stared at the floor. "Somebody has to." The sentence slipped out before she could stop it. Silence followed immediately after. Even Micah stopped digging through grocery bags. Elena closed her eyes briefly. William pretended not to notice the pain crossing her face. "What happened?" he asked carefully. Elena hesitated while Naomi quickly busied herself unpacking cans into the kitchen cabinets. "I got sick last spring," Elena admitted finally. "I worked housekeeping at the Palmer Hotel for 6 years, but after a while," she paused to catch her breath. "After a while I could not keep up anymore." William understood now. The tiredness in her voice. The instability in her hands. The way Naomi constantly watched her mother when she thought nobody noticed. "We are okay," Naomi said quickly from the kitchen. "Mama just needs rest." Elena gave a weak smile that did not reach her eyes. "Naomi has been trying to protect everyone since the day I lost my job." William watched the little girl carefully stack soup cans by size on the counter, while Micah proudly carried the loaf of bread like it was fragile glass. "How long has she been walking to stores alone?" he asked.
Elena
Looked embarrassed again. "Too long." Naomi turned around immediately. "I know how to stay safe." "That is not the point," Elena whispered. The apartment grew quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the storm outside. William loosened his coat slightly, suddenly too warm beneath the tiny apartment lights. He had spent years sitting in boardrooms discussing numbers connected to poverty programs, food access, and struggling neighborhoods. Yet standing here felt different. Real. Uncomfortable in ways spreadsheets never were. Micah climbed onto the couch beside his mother, holding the cereal box against his chest. "Can we really eat this tonight?" he asked softly. Elena looked toward William uncertainly, still unable to fully accept kindness without expecting consequences attached to it. William answered before she could. "You can eat all of it." Micah grinned so suddenly that even Elena laughed quietly under her breath. Naomi stopped unpacking for a moment just to watch her little brother smile. William noticed the way her shoulders relaxed for the first time since the supermarket. As if seeing Micah happy allowed her to be a child again for a few seconds. Then Naomi reached into her coat pocket slowly and pulled out the wrinkled $1 bill. She stared at it silently before walking over to William. "I still want to pay you back," she whispered. William looked down at the crumpled bill resting in her small hand. "Naomi," he said gently, "you do not owe me anything." But Naomi shook her head. "That dollar was supposed to fix tonight," she said quietly. "And it did not." William stared at the wrinkled $1 bill resting in Naomi's small hand, while the tiny apartment hummed softly around them. The Christmas lights blinked unevenly beside the window. Snow tapped steadily against the glass. Somewhere far below on the street, a siren echoed through the storm before fading into the city night. Naomi held the dollar carefully by its corners, as if it mattered too much to crease any further. "My dad gave it to me," she said quietly. Elena looked down immediately. Micah stopped shaking the cereal box. The room changed somehow after those words, becoming softer and heavier all at once. William lowered himself slowly into the old chair beside the heater. "Your father," Naomi nodded, "before he left for the hospital last year." Her voice stayed calm, but she rubbed her thumb across the faded edges of the bill over and over again. "He told me to keep it for emergencies." William glanced toward Elena, who sat silently twisting the sleeve of her cardigan between trembling fingers. "Naomi thinks every hard day is an emergency," she whispered sadly. Naomi looked up quickly. "Because sometimes it is." Silence settled over the room again. Not angry silence, tired silence. The kind families carried when they had already worried too much for too long. Micah climbed onto the couch beside his mother and leaned sleepily against her shoulder while still hugging the cereal box. William noticed how thin the little boy's arms looked beneath his pajamas. He looked around the apartment once more. The place was spotless despite everything. Dishes washed and stacked carefully. Blankets folded neatly on the couch. Shoes lined against the wall. Even the tiny Christmas tree had handmade paper ornaments hanging from its branches. Nothing here felt careless, only stretched thin. Naomi carefully folded the dollar bill and slid it back into her pocket. "I thought if I used it for the right thing," she whispered, "maybe things would finally get better." William leaned forward slightly. "Naomi, $1 was never supposed to carry all of this." She frowned softly. "Then why did it feel so important?" William opened his mouth, then stopped. "Because sometimes people without enough money attached hope to the smallest things. Because when life became uncertain, even $1 could start feeling like control." But looking at her exhausted little face beneath the blinking Christmas lights, he could not bring himself to say any of that aloud. Elena coughed quietly into her sleeve. Naomi immediately turned toward her. "Mama, did you take your medicine?" Elena forced a smile. "I will in a minute." Naomi did not move. "You said that this morning too." William watched the exchange carefully. 8 years old, and already speaking like a worried parent.
Elena
Sighed softly before looking toward the kitchen counter where a small orange prescription bottle sat nearly empty beside the sink. "I was trying to make it last longer." Naomi's face tightened. "Mama." "Baby, it is okay." But it clearly was not. William glanced toward the bottle again. He did not need a doctor to recognize rationing medication when he saw it. The realization settled heavily inside him. Naomi walked quietly into the kitchen and opened one of the grocery bags. She pulled out the loaf of bread, peanut butter, and a package of soup, carefully organizing dinner like she had done it hundreds of times before. "Micah likes his toast cut into squares," she explained softly without turning around. "He says triangles taste weird." Micah nodded very seriously from the couch. "Triangles are suspicious." For the first time all evening, William laughed quietly under his breath. The sound surprised even him. Naomi glanced back over her shoulder and smiled a little when she heard it. Then suddenly the apartment lights flickered once, twice. The heater groaned loudly before shutting off completely. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Cold air immediately began creeping through the cracked window near the tree. Micah's smile disappeared. Elena closed her eyes briefly like this had happened before. Naomi stood completely still in the kitchen, one hand gripping the bread bag tightly. William looked around the darkened apartment while only the tiny Christmas lights continued blinking softly in the corner, powered by weak batteries. "The power does this sometimes during storms," Naomi whispered, trying very hard to sound calm. Then the apartment gave one final click, and even the Christmas lights went dark. Darkness swallowed the apartment so completely that, for a moment, nobody moved. The storm outside groaned through the old building, while freezing wind slipped through the cracked window beside the tiny Christmas tree. Somewhere down the hallway, another apartment door opened, followed by frustrated voices and the sharp cry of a child. Then silence returned again, thick and cold. Micah climbed closer against Elena immediately. "Mama," he whispered, nervously. "It is okay, baby," Elena said softly, though her voice sounded tired rather than certain. Naomi moved first. "Wait here," she said quickly before disappearing into the kitchen. A few seconds later, the soft scratch of a match broke through the darkness. Warm golden light flickered to life across the apartment as Naomi lit 3 small candles and carefully placed them around the room in old coffee mugs. Shadows stretched along the walls. The apartment suddenly looked smaller, quieter, and strangely fragile beneath the candlelight. William stood near the window watching Naomi move through the darkness with calm efficiency no child should ever have needed to learn. "The power company says our building is too old," Naomi explained while adjusting one candle beside the couch. "When storms get bad, the electricity quits sometimes." William glanced toward the dead heater. The apartment was already getting colder. He removed his coat immediately and handed it toward Elena. "Please." Elena shook her head weakly. "No, sir. You already did enough tonight. Take the coat." Something in his voice made her stop arguing. She accepted it quietly, wrapping the heavy wool around herself and Micah together. Naomi stood by the kitchen counter, rubbing warmth into her hands near one of the candles. "The lights usually come back in an hour," she whispered. "Sometimes 2. Outside, snow hammered harder against the windows. William reached for his phone instinctively, only to realize there was almost no signal inside the building. One weak bar flickered before disappearing again. He looked around the apartment slowly. Candlelight danced across crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. One picture showed a little girl holding hands with a tall man beneath a yellow sun. Another showed a Christmas tree much larger than the real one sitting dark in the corner now. "Naomi drew those," Elena said softly from the couch. "She wants to be an artist someday." Naomi immediately looked embarrassed. "Mama." "What?" Elena smiled faintly despite her exhaustion. "You are good." Naomi stared down at the floor. Art supplies cost money. William looked at the drawings more carefully then. They were not childish scribbles. They were careful, detailed, hopeful. He felt something uncomfortable twist inside his chest again. How many children like Naomi had he passed his entire life without seeing? How many times had he walked past people carrying worlds on tiny shoulders while discussing profits inside heated boardrooms? Micah suddenly tugged on William's sleeve. "Mr. Everett?" William looked down. "Yes. Do rich people ever get scared?" The question hung softly in the candlelit apartment. William almost smiled. "Sometimes more than anybody else." Micah considered this seriously. "What are you scared of?" William looked toward the dark window where his own reflection stared faintly back at him between streaks of snow. For years his fears had been simple. Losing deals, losing money, losing control. But standing inside apartment 3B beside a little girl trying to hold her family together with $1 and stubborn courage, those fears suddenly felt embarrassingly small. "I think," he said slowly, "I am scared of becoming someone who forgets other people matter." Naomi looked up sharply when he said it. The candlelight reflected softly in her dark eyes. Elena watched him quietly from the couch, as though trying to decide whether she believed him. Then Naomi walked toward the dead Christmas tree and crouched beside it. "Hold on," she whispered. She reached beneath the branches and pulled out a tiny battery lantern no bigger than her hand. When she clicked it on, warm yellow light filled the room again, brighter this time. Micah grinned instantly. "See," Naomi said softly. "I told you we would still have Christmas lights." William stared at the little lantern glowing between her small fingers while snow raged outside and cold crept slowly through the walls. Somehow that tiny light felt stronger than every chandelier inside his penthouse downtown. Naomi placed the lantern beside the tree carefully, then looked back toward William. "Most people leave when things get uncomfortable," she said quietly. "But you stayed." Naomi stood quietly beside the glowing lantern while its warm light painted soft gold across her face and braids. Outside, the storm continued pounding against the building, but inside apartment 3B everything had become strangely calm. Micah sat cross-legged on the carpet eating dry cereal from a plastic bowl with complete seriousness, as if this was the greatest feast he had ever seen. Elena leaned back against the couch cushions wrapped in William's heavy coat, her breathing slower now beneath the warmth. William remained near the dark window, unable to stop looking at the little family gathered around candlelight and borrowed hope. Naomi's words still echoed in his chest. "Most people leave when things get uncomfortable." She had said it so casually, like experience instead of accusation. William loosened his tie slightly, suddenly aware that he had not checked his watch or answered a single business call in hours. Somewhere downtown, executives were probably waiting for him inside a luxury restaurant with crystal glasses and expensive steaks growing cold. The thought felt absurd now. Naomi carefully poured milk into Micah's bowl, making sure he got more than she did. William noticed immediately. "Where is yours?" Naomi blinked. "What?" "Your cereal. I already ate earlier." Micah looked up innocently. "No, you did not." Naomi's cheeks flushed instantly. "Micah, you said dinner could wait till tomorrow because grown people skip meals sometimes." Silence settled heavily across the apartment. Elena closed her eyes briefly again, pain flickering across her exhausted face. William stared at Naomi standing barefoot beside the kitchen counter, pretending hunger was a scheduling choice instead of reality. Naomi quickly reached for a second bowl. "I am not hungry now." William stepped closer quietly. "Naomi." She froze slightly at the softness in his voice. "You do not have to protect everybody every second." Naomi looked down at the spoon in her hand. "If I stop, things fall apart." The honesty of the sentence landed harder than she probably understood. William glanced toward Elena. "Has she always been like this?" Elena smiled sadly beneath the oversized coat. "Ever since her father passed away." Naomi immediately busied herself opening the soup cans, but William saw her shoulders tighten. "He worked maintenance downtown," Elena continued softly. "One winter morning he collapsed during a shift. Heart condition nobody knew about." Micah lowered his spoon quietly. Naomi kept facing the counter. "After that," Elena whispered. "She stopped being a child so fast I'd barely noticed it happening." William watched Naomi strike another match to relight a dying candle. Her tiny fingers moved carefully, practiced. Too practiced. "The dollar was from him?" William asked gently. Naomi nodded without turning around. "He kept it folded in his wallet forever." Her voice grew quieter. "The last thing he told me was to always save something for emergencies because life changes fast." She finally turned toward William, holding the steaming soup pot carefully against her chest. "After he died, Mama cried when bills came in the mail. So I thought if I never spent the dollar, maybe we would stay okay somehow." Elena wiped quickly at her eyes before Naomi could notice. Micah leaned sleepily against her shoulder again while the storm outside rattled the windows harder. William looked at the crumpled $1 bill peeking slightly from Naomi's coat pocket. Suddenly he remembered something he had not thought about in decades. A freezing January night in Ohio. His own mother counting quarters at a gas station counter while pretending not to notice customers staring. The humiliation in her smile when she came up short. William had been 10 years old, standing beside her holding a loaf of bread. Almost Naomi's age. He looked around apartment 3B again, but this time it no longer felt unfamiliar. felt painfully recognizable. The fear of running out, the pretending, the quiet calculations children should never have to learn. Naomi carefully handed him a bowl of soup. "It is not fancy," she said softly, "but it is warm." William accepted it slowly. Steam curled into the cold apartment air between them. "Thank you," he whispered. Naomi looked surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Then suddenly the hallway outside erupted with loud footsteps and frustrated shouting from another apartment. Someone cursed about frozen pipes. A baby started crying again somewhere downstairs. Micah jumped slightly at the noise. Instinctively, Naomi moved closer to him at once. William watched her wrap one arm around her little brother while still balancing hot soup in the other hand. Tiny, exhausted, brave beyond reason. And in that moment, standing in a dark apartment lit by candles and a battery lantern, William Everett realized something that unsettled him deeply. Naomi Carter had spent the entire night protecting everyone around her, including him. The soup warmed William's hands as he sat quietly at the tiny kitchen table, watching Naomi divide crackers evenly between bowls with careful concentration. She counted each one twice before giving the extra cracker to Micah when she thought nobody noticed. The apartment remained dim beneath candlelight and the soft yellow lantern glowing beside the dark Christmas tree. Outside, the storm had become a steady roar against the building. But inside apartment 3B, the warmth of soup and human voices pushed the cold back inch by inch. Micah yawned halfway through his bowl, eyelids drooping heavily. "Do not fall asleep in your soup," Naomi whispered with a tired smile. Micah blinked slowly at William across the table. "Mr. Everett?" "Yes. Are you really a billionaire?" Naomi immediately looked embarrassed. "Micah," but William answered anyway. "Yes." Micah thought very hard about this. "Does that mean you own, like, 3 bicycles?" Elena laughed softly into her sleeve while Naomi shook her head. "Baby, billionaires own companies." Micah's eyes widened even more. "That sounds exhausting." William surprised himself by laughing again, fuller this time. The sound filled the apartment warmly, bouncing off old walls and flickering candlelight. Naomi looked at him curiously, almost like she had not expected rich people to laugh like ordinary people. William set his spoon down slowly. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was a kid, my mother and I lived in an apartment smaller than this." Naomi froze slightly beside the stove. "Really? Really?" Elena looked up with quiet surprise. William stared down at the soup bowl in his hands as old memories rose slowly through him like ghosts waking up. "My father left when I was young. My mother worked double shifts at a diner outside Cleveland." He smiled faintly without humor. "Some nights she told me she was not hungry, so I would eat more." Naomi lowered her eyes immediately because she recognized the lie too well. "One winter," William continued softly, "our heat stopped working during a snowstorm. My mother boiled water on the stove because she heard steam made rooms feel warmer. The apartment became completely silent except for the storm outside." Elena stared at him differently now, not like a billionaire standing in her apartment, like someone who understood pieces of the same darkness. Naomi slowly sat down across from him. "What happened after that?" William leaned back slightly in the old chair. "A man from our church came to fix the heater for free." He paused. "I still remember my mother crying after he left because she said nobody had helped us in a long time." Naomi studied him carefully beneath the candlelight. "Did things get better?" William looked around apartment 3B before answering. "Eventually." The honesty of the word mattered more than false promises ever could. Micah yawned again before curling against Elena beneath William's coat. Naomi quietly carried empty bowls to the sink. Her small silhouette moved through candlelight with the same calm responsibility William had watched all night. "You became rich because you worked hard?" she asked softly while rinsing spoons. William hesitated. "Partly." Naomi glanced over her shoulder. "What is the other part?" William looked toward the dead heater beside the wall. "Somebody helped me before I could help myself." Naomi turned that answer over silently in her head. The candles flickered lower as the apartment temperature slowly dropped again. William checked his watch out of habit and finally realized it was nearly midnight. Hours had passed without him noticing. His phone still showed no signal. Yet for the first time in years, he did not feel trapped by silence. He felt present. Elena shifted carefully beneath the coat. "Mr. Everett," she said quietly, "I know tonight probably feels small to someone like you." William looked at her immediately. No, the word came, sharper than intended. Softer this time, he added, "Tonight does not feel small at all." Naomi looked up from the sink. Their eyes met briefly across the candlelit apartment. William suddenly understood something unsettling about himself. He had spent years building stores large enough to feed thousands of people, yet somewhere along the way he had stopped seeing hunger when it stood directly in front of him. The realization hurt. Then suddenly the hallway lights outside flickered back on beneath the apartment door. A second later, the refrigerator hummed loudly to life. The heater rattled awake with a violent clang. Warm yellow light flooded the apartment all at once. Micah shot upright with excitement. "The power is back." Naomi smiled softly in relief while Elena covered her eyes against the brightness. But William remained still in his chair, staring at the little family illuminated beneath ordinary apartment lights again. Because somehow, in the darkness, he had started seeing things more clearly than he had in years. The apartment suddenly felt alive again. The heater hummed unevenly near the wall, warm air creeping slowly back into the room, while the refrigerator buzzed like it had been holding its breath. Micah cheered softly from the couch and rushed toward the Christmas tree. "Turn the lights back on," he whispered excitedly. Naomi knelt beside him and plugged the tiny tree into the outlet near the window. A second later, faded red, green, and blue lights blinked across the branches once more. The whole apartment changed with that tiny burst of color. Even Elena smiled fully for the first time all night. William watched quietly from the kitchen table while Naomi adjusted one crooked paper ornament near the top of the tree. Beneath the ordinary apartment lights, he could see how exhausted she really looked now. Dark circles beneath her eyes, tiny cracks in the skin around her cold hands. But still, she smiled for Micah anyway. "There," she whispered softly. "Christmas survived." Micah grinned and threw his arms around her waist. Naomi hugged him back automatically while balancing herself against the couch with one hand. William noticed the movement. Immediately, the slight wobble in her knees from exhaustion. She had been carrying too much for too long. Elena carefully stood from the couch. "Micah, bedtime. But Mr. Everett is still here. And Mr. Everett probably wants to go home eventually," Elena said gently. Micah looked horrified by the possibility. "Can he come back tomorrow?" Naomi immediately looked down, embarrassed again. William surprised himself by answering before thinking. "Maybe." Micah accepted this answer like a solemn contract before disappearing into the bedroom carrying the cereal box proudly against his chest. Elena smiled tiredly after him. "He is going to tell every child in this building that he met a billionaire tonight." William loosened his tie completely now. "I think I liked him better before he knew that part." Naomi glanced up from the Christmas tree with a faint smile. "Most people like you more after they know." The sentence was innocent, but it landed heavily anyway. William looked around apartment 3B once more. He had spent years being admired for numbers, buildings, and headlines. Yet tonight, the only moments that had felt real came before Naomi recognized what his money meant. Elena leaned lightly against the counter, still wrapped in William's coat. "You should not stay much longer in this weather if you still need to drive downtown." William checked his phone again. No messages mattered enough anymore. "My driver probably assumes I was kidnapped." Naomi's eyes widened slightly before realizing he was joking. A tiny laugh escaped her before she covered her mouth quickly. William smiled faintly at the sound. It struck him then how rare genuine laughter had become in his own life. Naomi walked carefully toward the kitchen drawer and pulled out a sheet of folded notebook paper covered in colored pencil sketches. "Can I show you something?" she asked quietly. "Of course." She handed him the paper carefully like it was fragile. William unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing of a grocery store during winter. Snow falling outside. a little girl standing near a checkout lane holding bread. But beside her was a tall man carrying grocery bags while warm light glowed around. Both of them. The details stopped him cold. Naomi had drawn exhaustion into the man's eyes. Loneliness too. Yet somehow she had also drawn kindness there before he had even seen it in himself. "You drew this tonight?" William asked softly. Naomi nodded. While the soup was heating, Elena smiled quietly from the counter. "She notices everything." William stared at the drawing longer than he intended. Then he looked at Naomi standing nervously beneath the blinking Christmas lights. "You are very talented." Naomi shrugged slightly, almost defensive about compliments now. "Art does not really help with bills." "Maybe not today," William said carefully. "But it matters." Naomi studied him for a second like she was deciding whether adults truly believe things like that anymore. Then suddenly a sharp knock echoed through the apartment door. Everyone froze slightly. Elena looked confused. Who would be here this late? Naomi instinctively stepped closer toward the door before William quietly stood first. Another knock sounded through the apartment. Slower this time. Heavy winter boots shifting in the hallway outside. William moved carefully toward the door while snow hissed against the windows behind him. Then a familiar voice called through the wood from the hallway. "Mr. Everett? It is Marcus from security." "Sir, are you in there?" William opened the apartment door slowly. An icy air rushed into the warm hallway light behind Marcus Reed, his head of security. Snow clung to Marcus's dark coat and shoulders while concern tightened across his face. "Sir," Marcus breathed in relief, "we have been trying to reach you for hours." William glanced back into apartment 3B before stepping partly into the hallway. "I lost signal." Marcus lowered his voice slightly. "The board dinner was canceled after the storm worsened. But half the company thinks you disappeared." William almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Billion-dollar executives panicking because one man had vanished for a few hours while an entire family had been quietly surviving emergencies every single day. Marcus noticed the apartment behind him then. The blinking Christmas tree, the tiny kitchen table, Naomi, standing protectively near Elena and Micah. His expression shifted carefully into professionalism. "Sir, the roads are getting worse. The driver is waiting downstairs." William nodded slowly but did not move. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the floor. The apartment suddenly felt different now that reality had arrived at the door wearing polished shoes and corporate concern. William looked back toward the family inside. Micah clutched the cereal box tighter against his chest like he feared all of this might disappear once the billionaire left. Elena adjusted William's coat around herself awkwardly, suddenly aware again of the distance between their worlds. Naomi stood still beside the Christmas tree lights, quiet and unreadable. "Mr. Everett?" Marcus asked softly. William turned back toward him. "Wait downstairs." Marcus blinked once in surprise. "Sir, 5 more minutes." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, then stopped when he saw William's expression. "Yes, sir." He stepped back into the hallway and disappeared toward the stairwell. William closed the apartment door gently behind him. Silence settled over the room again, softer this time. Naomi stared at the floor for several seconds before finally speaking. "You should probably go." William looked at her carefully. "Do you want me to?" Naomi hesitated. No, the honesty in her answer made Elena smile faintly from the couch. William walked slowly back toward the tiny Christmas tree glowing near the window. "I spent most of my life believing money solved everything," he admitted quietly. "Tonight reminded me that sometimes people need to be seen before they can be helped." Naomi looked at him beneath the colored lights. "Most people see us." William shook his head gently. "No. They notice you. That is different." Naomi fell silent after that. Somewhere downstairs a radiator clanged loudly through the building pipes. Snow still scraped against the windows, but the apartment felt warmer now in ways the heater could not explain. William reached into his coat pocket slowly and pulled out a business card. Then he paused, staring at it for a second before sliding it back inside. Naomi noticed. "What?" she asked. Softly. William smiled faintly. For once, I do not want this to feel like business. He looked around the apartment carefully one last time. The drawings on the refrigerator. The soup bowls drying beside the sink. The patched curtains moving slightly from the heater breeze. Ordinary things. Precious things. Naomi, he said quietly. Would it be all right if I came back tomorrow? Naomi blinked in surprise. Why? William glanced toward the drawing she had made earlier, still resting on the table. Because I think this family has been carrying too much alone. Elena lowered her eyes quickly, emotional in a way she clearly hated showing strangers. Micah looked openly hopeful. But Naomi studied William carefully before answering. People say things when they feel bad, she whispered. Then they disappear after. The room became very still. William understood immediately this conversation was no longer about groceries or storms. It was about disappointment, promises, adults who left. He stepped closer to the Christmas tree lights until soft red and green reflections touched the edges of his face. Naomi, he said gently, I am not promising to fix everything overnight. He paused. But I am promising you will not be invisible to me anymore. Naomi stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the wrinkled $1 bill again. William looked down at it in confusion. Naomi held it toward him with trembling fingers. Keep it tonight, she whispered. That way I will know you are coming back. William looked from the dollar bill to Naomi's exhausted little face glowing beneath Christmas lights that flickered softly against the apartment walls. Then very carefully, like he was being trusted with something priceless, he accepted it. The storm had softened by the time William Everett finally stepped out of apartment 3B. Snow drifted quietly beneath the streetlights now, covering the sidewalks in silver while the city hummed low beneath midnight skies. Marcus stood near the black SUV downstairs, hands tucked into his coat against the cold. He opened the back door immediately when William emerged from the building. But William did not get in right away. Instead, he stood still on the sidewalk looking back up at the third-floor apartment window glowing softly above him. Tiny Christmas lights blinked behind the glass. Warm, uneven, alive. And somewhere inside that small apartment, an 8-year-old girl trusted him enough to hand over the last dollar her father had ever given her. William reached slowly into his coat pocket and unfolded the wrinkled bill beneath the falling snow. Marcus glanced at it in confusion. Sir. William stared down at the fragile piece of paper resting in his gloved hand. This, he said quietly, is the most valuable thing anybody has given me in years. Marcus looked toward the apartment window again but asked no questions. During the drive downtown, William remained silent in the back seat while Chicago slid past the windows in blurred lights and frozen streets. His phone vibrated endlessly with missed calls, canceled meetings, worried executives, and news alerts. One notification caught his attention briefly. A short video from Everett Market had already begun spreading online. The headline read, Billionaire stops to help little girl with $1 at grocery store. Millions of people would watch the clip by morning. They would discuss generosity, publicity, corporate image. But none of them would understand the truth. The real moment had not happened inside the supermarket. It had happened inside apartment 3B beneath broken heaters, candlelight, and a tiny Christmas tree struggling to stay bright. William leaned his head back against the leather seat and closed his eyes briefly. 4 years he had measured success in stock prices, acquisitions, and magazine covers. Yet tonight, the thing haunting him most was the image of Naomi carefully counting crackers so her brother could have more. The next morning, sunlight spilled pale and cold across downtown Chicago, while television anchors replayed the grocery store footage on giant studio screens. Social media exploded with praise for William Everett's kindness. Reporters requested interviews. Investors called it brilliant public relations. William ignored every single one of them. Instead, at exactly 9:30 in the morning, a black SUV pulled up outside apartment 3B once again. Naomi peeked carefully through the curtains before her eyes widened in disbelief. Mama, she whispered. He came back. Elena looked up from the couch, stunned. A moment later, A knock sounded softly at the apartment door. Naomi opened it slowly. William stood there holding 2 large paper bags in one hand and a long flat box tucked beneath his arm. Snow dusted the shoulders of his coat again. But this time he smiled the moment he saw her. "I said I would come back." Naomi looked down immediately, trying to hide how relieved she felt. "Most people do not." William stepped inside the apartment while Micah ran toward him excitedly wearing mismatched socks. "You came." William handed one grocery bag to Elena carefully. Fresh groceries. Real medicine this time too. Elena's eyes filled instantly when she saw the pharmacy bag resting on top. "Mr. Everett?" "William," he corrected gently. Then he turned toward Naomi and held out the flat box tucked beneath his arm. "This is for you." Naomi frowned slightly before taking it carefully. Inside was a brand new sketchbook along with colored pencils, markers, charcoal sticks, and watercolor paints arranged neatly in rows. Naomi froze completely. "You remembered," she whispered. William smiled softly. "You notice everything. I figured somebody should notice you too." Naomi ran her fingers slowly across the untouched sketchbook pages, while Christmas lights still blinked quietly in the corner behind her, even in daylight. Micah immediately pointed at the art set. "Draw Mr. Everett with better hair this time." Elena laughed softly while William pretended to look offended. Naomi laughed too then, fully this time, bright and sudden and real enough to fill the apartment with warmth stronger than the heater ever could. William looked at the little girl standing there with tears shining in her eyes and art supplies held against her chest like treasure. Then he carefully reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the wrinkled $1 bill. He placed it gently on the kitchen table between them. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. Naomi stared at the dollar for a long moment before looking back at him. And for the first time since her father died, the weight she carried inside her small shoulders no longer looked quite so heavy.